Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jonathan Edwards, and joining me are my co-hosts, Scott Burleson and Jan Vermuth. So today we are going to try to break jobs to be done. We're going to prod it, push it, pull on it, and generally try to exploit its weaknesses to see how it holds up. We will look at situations where jobs to be done seems to break down, situations where things people do are hard to explain from a jobs to be done perspective. We will talk about the role of emotion in people's behavior. In jobs to be done, there's this notion of an emotional job, which we will also take apart. So to start off, Scott, you published on LinkedIn a very thought-provoking riddle the other day. Would you mind just explaining that riddle to us and to the audience?
Sure. And also sort of why it's even riddle at all. But when I posted that, I didn't explain it very well, so I'll try to do better here. But the question I posed, well, first of all, with jobs to be done, we believe we start with a job and we can identify the criteria that helps the customer to accomplish a job better. And then they select the product that helps them to accomplish that job better. So in this riddle, there appears to be the product that wins appears to be the one that's not accomplishing the job better based on the obvious criteria that come to mind. And this was what I posed. I said, why? And by the way, this might be a global thing. But the question I posed was, why do Americans prefer chicken wings over chicken tenders? Now, again, maybe that's not just American, maybe that's global. It's certainly an American thing. But why is it a riddle at all? Well, if you can think about the difficulty in eating wings versus chicken tenders, a lot of things come to mind. It's going to be much messier to eat the chicken wings. You're not able to eat. You're going to get sauce on your fingers, for example, with wings, as opposed to chicken tenders. You could just cut them, and it would be the choice white meat or whatever. It could be any cut of meat, and you eat it. You could dip it in the sauce. You keep your hands perfectly clean. Just everything about eating a chicken wing takes more work. Like there's different types, and you have to, nibble on it, and there's a skin, and there's just lots of different components there. So, but everything about the process of consuming chicken seems to be more difficult with chicken wings than chicken tenders. So, which begs the question, has jobs to be done broken down? Why are Americans apparently making a decision to choose a product, chicken wings, which would not get the job done better in chicken tenders? And it's a question I've thought about myself. I didn't phrase the riddle very well. So maybe we should start with that. Does it make sense why it's a riddle or an element of confusion to begin with?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to admit, I totally missed the point of your riddle when you posted it. And what I didn't quite get was the idea, which I think which is implied implicitly, which is that the tenders and the wings both taste just as good. So there's basically no difference in taste between these two, the two of them.
I think that if we're starting to come up with a hypothesis, that's one you couldn't rule out. Is there some reason the wings taste better than the tenders? As a consumer, I think that's probably not the case. If anything, I think the tenders probably taste better, but that's obviously just a one person personal preference. But you could not rule. But if jobs to be done does work, we're going to have to think of what are the criteria in which wings would be preferred, and we can't rule that out. I personally wouldn't rate it, but we can't rule it out.
Yeah. So I think taste is definitely something that hopefully we'll touch upon a bit later, because it's definitely I would say one of a hot topic in jobs to be done. It's not something that's necessarily easy to handle, and we can talk about it. I think for the sake of the argument here, it is interesting to consider that it's not because of taste that people prefer the tenders over the wings. And so if I understand correctly, it's really just a functional difference between the tenders and the wings. So there's some functional advantages which you've explained, Scott, to the tenders.
I think there's are obvious functional advantages of the tenders. Perhaps there's some for the wings, but they're certainly not as obvious. The things that just jump out at you are, well, they're more difficult to cook. You have to cook them longer. When you're paying per pound, now you're also paying with the tenders, you're really paying for a high percentage of meat. With wings, you're paying for bone and for gristle and for skin, right? So it appears to lose on the criteria that are just obvious that jump out at you. But this preference, if the preference was mild, I think you would dismiss it, but it's pretty substantial. And it's interesting. I was overhearing an executive in the packaging industry, and he's good friends with an executive in the poultry industry. And he was recounting a story he had heard. And he said back in the 1980s, chicken breasts cost much more per pound than wings did. And today that's completely reversed. And now chicken wings cost much more per pound than breasts did. And it's back then, it's like, this is an exaggeration. Okay. But it was like, you could pull out the breasts, sell those and throw the rest away. And now it's like you take the chicken, cut the wings off, and throw the rest away. That's an exaggeration. It's not literal, but over time, and maybe something in that change of preference, maybe there's a clue there into this, where the preference for wings went up and the preference for the breast went down over time. So maybe that contains a clue in what's going on. I don't know.
So maybe just before we go any further, which team would you be on, like chicken wings or tenders?
Well, that's one so I am team chicken wings. I also prefer them.
Me as well.
So I do have some opinions. I have some thoughts about why I would choose them. So I can at least offer that. That gives me insight into one person's criteria. But partly, Jan, that's where the riddle comes from. I'm observing my own behavior at making decisions that seem to not. I'm choosing to eat something more difficult.
Yeah.
Why am I doing that?
There's really, I think this is kind of, for me, was kind of the core of the riddle. So I didn't answer on LinkedIn because I really tried to figure it out. And I think what you're kind of calling into question is, what do we mean by, for example, getting a job done better? What actually counts as an advantage of something? And I think that is kind of or at least for me, was the difficulty to figure this out. Like, because some things that we might judge to be struggles are something like a benefit of the thing. So exactly how you explained it before. So it's harder to eat, it's messier to eat. From a certain perspective, this can seem like a challenge or like something you wouldn't want to have under whatever circumstances you want to, like normal circumstances. Right. But in this case, something like a disadvantage is maybe exactly the point. So and that I think is a really hard thing to wrap your head around. And as you kind of showed now, I think these kind of, maybe there is explanations we jump to. So these economic explanations, well, it's a question of price, but then now you should not be eating as many chicken wings as we do, but we do. But I mean, the price has gone up since, I don't know, the 80s apparently, but and we still do. Or there is something like social explanations where you would say, well, it's American culture and it's just Americans and blah, blah, blah. But I think that doesn't really hold. Of course, that has like an effect on it. I mean, taste preferences are something social to a certain extent.
Right.
But then again, I think probably that holds very true in other countries as well. And it would be very weird if it's just precisely an American thing. So I think these explanations they only go so far, let's say.
By the way, is this only an American thing, the preference for wings? Where are you guys?
I love wings, always.
So if you could order one or the other, you would order wings.
Yeah, always.
What about you, Jonathan? Just so we're off.
Well, I have to say it really depends on the context myself. So if I'm just having grilled chicken, I would go for the wings. Because, and unfortunately here, I'm going to ruin the riddle because I really think it's a question of taste. So I think if you just have grilled chicken, the wings are nicer because you get all this nicely grilled skin, and it gives like this additional nice taste. And often I find that the chicken breasts can get a bit dry, depending how you cook them. On the other hand, if you have something that's made with some kind of sauce or something like this, I might go for the breast. So this is why I kind of misunderstood the riddle, because for me, I really put it down to a question of taste. But I think it's definitely a thing. I mean, maybe the riddle is not perfect in terms of that, because there is this taste element, but I think it's definitely a thing. You actually talked about other examples when we discussed this. You talked about, what was it, like opening lobsters or something? I don't remember what.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. As a scientific experiment, it's certainly imperfect because it's fattier meat on the wings. So it would, to compare it, you'd almost be better to compare it to thighs or something of a similar texture, similar fat content. So that we can't rule that out. But yeah, but I think one thing, to your point, that would well, first of all, we as innovators, we want to push for as much clarity as we can, and because it's preferred in the culture, that's not enough, and because they just like it better, it's just not enough. Now, we might end up there. We might do a lot of work, and that might be the place we end up. But at least we want to really challenge it to understand it as good as we can. Now, yes, so there's other parallels in eating where you select something more difficult to eat over something easier to eat. And maybe these are actually more comparable riddles because the meat's the same. Lobster is a great example. In a more expensive restaurant, they're going to be more likely to give you like the whole lobster with a bib, and you have to actually expend work to open the lobster. In a lower restaurant, they're going to give you the tail, and even maybe lower, well, very low, you wouldn't get one at all, but you just sort of get the meat. But so where I am in the eastern United States, there's a popular seafood or blue crabs. And you can buy blue crabs by the pound. It's already picked for you. It just comes in a little container. Or you can buy the whole crabs. You can actually buy them alive. You buy them alive. You bring them home. And so hopefully we won't get in trouble. Look, this is. I'm just describing something. I don't want PETA to get mad at me personally. But I'm just describing a market. There's a market where people buy the crabs live so they can cook them alive. Steam them alive, and then there's a tremendous amount of work to opening the crabs. Actually, maybe this is a better example than the lobster, because the lobster, you open the tail and you got this huge piece of meat. With the crabs, you are working for these little tiny pieces, and you're dipping it in the butter, and you're usually drinking beer, and you're having to work very hard for these little bits of meat. And again, maybe this is a better comparison because it is the same meat as if you bought this tub of crab. Now, if you came over like to my house and scenario one, I have crab on your plate, a little dollop of crab. Okay. Scenario two, I have this setup where I bring you crabs and everybody has the bibs and we're opening them together. The second one is a much more difficult experience to deliver. And I think most would argue a much more enjoyable experience. So maybe that's so I think we could fall quickly with taste with the chicken, except for there's such very similar parallels with some of these other types of food that take effort to eat, and maybe there's a clue for us in there.
So I actually have a theory for the crabs, I think, but before I go there, I just want to say, give a notice to all the folks out there that we're just speculating here, right? So if you want to sell crabs or do stuff like this, I mean, just go and talk to your customers and figure out what they want to do, because we're just throwing things out here. But so firstly, I would say so I really like the crab example, and I think this is, generally speaking, I think we can categorize this as people deliberately choosing a struggle in doing something. I think that's the general category.
Yeah.
And I think there are multiple reasons why people might choose struggles. And for the crab, I think there are also multiple reasons. I can think of at least two. And one which I think might definitely play a role is as a kind of social test or something like this. So if you're going to a fancy restaurant and you don't know how to eat crab, then somehow you will not pass a kind of social test. So it's a way of showing that you're in the know and that you know. So the job you're fulfilling is kind of what we might talk about a bit later, or we will talk about a bit later, is this notion maybe of social jobs. We'll see if that in itself is valid or not. But that would be my main theory on that. But it's true that when I eat these little whatever vongole or whatever you're eating, like seafood, generally this pain to open, you do get into this kind of thing where it's like a game a bit, right? I mean, you kind of it's the experience of the taste, but also the experience of opening it. You kind of get into this flow state of opening your little seashells and all that, which I think might also play a role. Where does that come from? Now that is a question that I will throw back to you, because I have really no idea. So maybe
I love the idea of the social test. And I think what we're getting to is that there are just other jobs involved that's not consuming a meal, in which the other jobs are more important than consuming a meal. Now, of course, taste would everything enters into it, but I love this show that you're knowledgeable. And another example of this is oysters. Where I assume you have oysters in Europe, but where you have to spend effort to open the oysters. This works. This, at least in seafood restaurants where I live, very similar. It's more expensive to buy an oyster roast. It's only available certain times a year than just to sort of coldly be served. The oysters are sort of gross looking by themselves, already out of the shell, right? Looking, but your social test reminds me of experiences I had in a restaurant a long time ago. I was with John Deere. We were we used to always go to Florida to introduce new products. And one of the things that we'd go to all these seafood restaurants, and there was this one where they would have raw oysters. Now, I grew up on the coast, so a lot of the seafood, it's not as exotic to me personally as all these folks from the Midwestern United States have never had seafood. And so they're really enjoying this social competition in a way of eating the oysters and demonstrating to each other that they like the oysters. And I'm really not participating in the competition because it's just not as exotic to me personally. But one of this is opening the oysters, but another competition was eating raw oysters. And it'd be like, well, I just had a raw oyster. Aren't you going to have a raw oyster? Like, it's almost like a little test. And I remember one time saying, I said, no, I eat my oysters steamed, fried. I'm not going to have them. And I remember somebody says, well, you don't know what you're missing out on. And I said, yeah, I'm missing out on hepatitis for one, but enjoy your raw oyster. But your social test comes to mind because it was a bit of a challenge. Would you eat the raw oysters? And there's a similar parallel with hot sauces sometimes. Where people are eating things that are very hot. That's not hot. I don't think that's hot. Yeah. It's almost like a competition. Anyway, I think the social test. I think if we're looking for clues, I think there are more. But I think that is part of our answer.
Jan, anything to add?
Well, I think so. But again, going to I just had a flashback to, I don't know the movie, but Julia Roberts, and I think it's Richard Gere. There is exactly this scene where he brings her along, Pretty Woman, of course, where he brings her along into a fancy restaurant, and kind of one of the tests, and she prepares heavily, I think how to eat oysters or crack open. So there is a whole thing in there. So I think this social element testing is really, really an important thing. So, but what I'm thinking about is, and I'm trying to kind of see how jobs to be done would hold up to this. But I think in general, what we see as well is in other areas as well. And it's not just in the eating, but it's also in the preparation. So especially over the last 2 years with all these COVID stuff, I think bread baking machines have skyrocketed. Like the sales went up like 160% or so. Like people started baking themselves and so on. So they kind of found which is much more cumbersome than just go out and buy the bread. And in the beginning, I'll assure you, most bakeries will produce better bread than you do. So anyway, so this deliberate choice of kind of having a challenge, I think it is something that is at the core of it, and that can, in some way, fit into, I think, jobs to be done kind of explanation. So why? Because, and maybe here I'm going a little bit off the rails, but I think especially in food, we're really, I mean, it's an intimate thing. I mean, taking something into your body is a really intimate thing. Yeah. And preparing something or being involved in the preparation of that thing, I think that kind of, okay, this is very speculative in a sense, but this is I think it translates into ownership a little bit. Like I'm making it my thing. So what is kind of the background of this? So there were these, I don't know if you know, these ready-made cakes. So there is this kind of the powders that you can buy, and then you just add some water and blah, blah. So I'm not 100% sure that the story is true, but the story goes like this. So they invented this powder, these ready-made cakes, and the only thing you had to do at the very, very beginning when they introduced this new product was just add water. So you just take the powder, you add water, you stir it a little bit around, and there's the cake. And it didn't sell at all. But that was like the most convenient solution. You don't have to do anything. Just heat up the oven, put in some water, stir it around, put it in there, take it out, and there you go. Now, what they found out, I'm not even sure if they did some research, but let's assume they did. What they found out is they talked to I'm sorry for the times, but at the times I think it was housewives, and talked how they do it. And what they figured out is like, this is not cooking for them. So just adding water wasn't enough to make them feel like they have cooked it actually. So they deliberately took things out. So now you have to add eggs. Now you have to add milk, which could perfectly be done by just having a powder solution. And now all of these ready-made things, you have to add a little bit more. You have to do a little bit more, but it has the effect that it is you are doing it. You are the person that does it. You can even customize it a little bit. And I think that wings are very nicely customizable, to be honest. Everybody has his favorite recipe and I think that kind of plays a role. Now I'm struggling to put these into jobs to be done words in these precise ways of criteria. So you see what I mean? But I think
I think you bring up an amazing point here. I think it's a very interesting point. I think it is something that that I had planned on talking about with you guys, and if maybe I can offer a bit of clarity, but hopefully we can also maybe leave this for a bit later, or we can go down this path. So I believe that we have to separate the idea of a challenge and the idea of what is called in some circles autotelic activities. What is an autotelic activity? It's an activity that we do for the sake of doing it. And so I think what you're describing here so you talked about the baking the bread. There is, it's definitely a challenge, but are we really doing it for the challenge in this case? Maybe we are, I don't know. But I think also for any kind of art, and this is why I said we'll probably discuss it a bit later, there is this idea of doing things for the sake of doing them. Someone paints, someone makes music, someone cooks. They do it because it's an activity that is pleasurable in and of itself. And I think that is definitely challenging for jobs to be done, and we can discuss it maybe a bit later. I don't know. What do you guys think about this separation?
One quick comment on Jan. That is that is a documented story. I've got the book right here.
Right.
The gentleman's name is Ernest Dichter, and his book is Motivating Human Behavior. Motivating Human Behavior, and that was an experiment from the 50s. Now, I believe there were a lot of. That was his conclusion. Well, his conclusion, from best I remember, was that these were housewives. And when they only added water, they didn't feel like they were doing enough. They didn't feel like they had really performed enough work putting into this cake for part of, loving the family. And so, but when all of a sudden they had to add eggs and milk, now they were performing enough. And so very much it's like, why it's a very similar question. I'm really glad you brought up that example. Why does this where you have to add more ingredients in over just add water? Now I do believe that it was the other folks disputed his conclusions and whatnot, but it was a real experiment that did happen, and those were his conclusions.
So his argument was that it was to basically, it was a proof, again, a bit like the oysters thing. You're doing it to prove that your love for your family or something like this.
That, from my recollection, it was about the housewife who wanted to participate and really give back to her family. And if she was only mixing water, she didn't feel like she had done that. Now, me thinking about it myself, I'm also wondering if she feels more competent. Now I'm saying she, because I'm just repeating what the experience.
That's very
I'm not offering any personal
I had the same
opinions. I'm only telling the information from this story. But I have to add that this Ernest Dichter, he very much was studying housewives, ladies at the time. So that was his sample, if you will. But so we can't really make assumptions outside of the sample. So within the sample, I think there's a competence feeling, and if you're having to do something harder, then you're more competent than let's just take it to something today. Why don't we just take everything out of the freezer and microwave it? I mean, that would be totally easier. And again, this thing of taste is never going away from this conversation, because you can't completely pull it out. But I think there's something to be said for, we do like, back to your point, Jan, I think we do like to participate in this act of creating our food. And Jonathan, I know you made so many good points a while ago about challenge versus auto-detect, but I wanted to at least mention that about making.
Can I just jump in? I'm sorry. I think we should. I mean, because from a innovator's perspective, the question is really relevant. I mean, the question is, should we remove all of the issues that our products have? Or should we not deliberately
Facebook doesn't do that. Facebook doesn't do it. Adding friction is this book by Nir Eyal. What's it called already? Hooked. By Nir Eyal makes this point on adding friction to you can't. That's how you get people addicted. You can't just make everything easy. You need to have some kind of friction added to the process. Sorry,
nice.
I cut you off.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think there is another. So I think this goes deep in how kind of we humans are kind of wired psychologically. But I think there is this really, we had it just now that you were talking, Scott, it came to my mind. But this is like a long time ago, some 10, 11 years ago, when I just more or less started working. We had a case where we worked for a company that produces like electronic parts. So in German, it's where all the fuses are in the house. They produce that box. I don't know what the name is.
Fuse box.
A fuse box, just a fuse box. And there we kind of worked on how to improve that box. And they launched a product. They had just launched a product where it was like almost like a Lego system. So for you as an electrician to install those boxes and install the fuses, it was extremely simple. It was color coded and everything like that. Like it was for them extremely simple. And the result was none of the electricians wanted to use that box. Then we went out and asked them, like, what? But you see, like the product was super easy to use. It took them like a couple of seconds to install it and everything, and it was refused because then the electrician said, hey, I trained 4 to 5 years for this job.
Of course.
And you're making me look like a stupid child that doesn't know his way around. And like I'm finished in 30 seconds. So how the hell should I bill for this work? Yeah, like, exactly. What are you doing?
But these are, this phenomenon you encounter a lot when you do B2B projects, typically with the IT department, who will block any kind of initiative that will reduce their their workload, right? I think that makes total sense. I don't think that I really have any trouble understanding from a jobs to be done perspective. It's just that the job that they're scared of losing their job and of not being able to bill as much. I mean, that's totally a functional. Yeah, there's a totally functional explanation.
Agree.
I think for this case.
Yeah, and it's easy to think of, well, the solution is that panel box or all the components, but it's not it. The solution is the panel box plus their expertise. Their expertise is part of the solution, and that expertise, they want to use it. They want to use their expertise. Now, there's also so with technology adoption, that's why it can be pretty tricky talking to incumbents, right? Because I bet I'm going to go on a limb, a brand new electrician without as much expertise would probably be more enthusiastic about the ones that fit together.
Yeah.
Again, I'm reminded of my biggest new product failure, which I'll be happy to share. Everybody likes to talk about their successes. I have a massive failure. I've got a big trophy.
That's where we learn.
I've got a big trophy that I was awarded for how good it was, and had all these awards, and but it didn't sell. And it was with John Deere, we came up with this tractor concept. The tractor drives like a car. This reminds me a lot of Jan's example, because general for tractors, I won't go into it, but there's all these different pedals and all these different sort of foreign looking things. And if you're very experienced, you find it easy. Distributors find them easy. But we were targeting a group of tractor owners or new tractor owners that don't have this experience, right?
Yeah.
So it drove like a car. The pedals looked like a car. The icons looked like vehicles. It had an accelerator. I mean, you had forward and reverse. You didn't have all these we took out all the complexity, and so when we showed this at a new product introduction, the dealers hated it. They were like, well, what is this? This doesn't drive like a tractor. But then occasionally you'd have some lost soul driving it at the demo. Like, wow, this is the best tractor I've ever seen. Go talk to that person a second. They don't have any experience. It's the first one they've ever driven. And so they loved it. And so the product failed ultimately because it needed to be sold through a dealer. This is in my opinion, through a dealer network that had that knowledge. It needed to be sold through a distributor group that may not appreciate what it's like to not have the knowledge they have, if that makes sense. And so I think part of the when introducing a new innovation, especially if it's something that really simplifies things, I think there needs to be I think you got to be clear. Are you targeting everybody or are you targeting the new folks? And if you're targeting the new folks, then you can't take too seriously the feedback from somebody outside of the segment. It was never for them to begin with. And so I think if you have that solution and you really target it at newer folks, I think you might get a different result. I hope I haven't taken us so far too far off track.
No, very good example.
Your story is just so me of that.
Hey, we learn much more from our failures apparently than from our successes. So I definitely. So I actually so that we can connect to I'd like to talk a bit about emotional jobs. But to connect to that, I first would like to get both of your opinions on the example that Jan brought up, which is this idea of this cooking, baking package that you can buy. So what, in your opinion, is the job? If we can just go back to get concrete on this. What is the job that this is solving exactly then? How would we frame it?
Okay, so I think here is like kind of the first well, I don't know if this is kind of going against, let's say, theory, but I think the question is, in a sense, it has to be put in a different way. For example, I don't think there is a one-to-one relation between a product and a job. And very often this is thought like that's the case. And I think the milkshake example, with all its glory that it has done, I'm not criticizing the example because it really, I've never seen an example that gets the point across better. And you see this because it's so widespread. But I think that example implies one product, one job. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. So even if you look at the ODI, like the what is it called? The universal job map, I think it's called.
Right.
There's subs jobs. So from the get-go, you will always have you will never have the answer. This is the job and the only job that the product gets done. Now, the way we do this is we think of jobs as a hierarchy. They are hierarchically ordered, and you have some kind of focus job in the middle, the one that you choose to innovate on. And for example, in this baking case, it could really just be to bake a cake, for example. And then you would, but then you would already kind of imply that baking is part of what you want to do. But that let's assume we want to kind of see at how people actually bake cakes. Now, around this job, you will have different jobs where the same solution is involved. So if you go higher up, especially if you think about, okay, this is about housewives or however you want to call it, but let's say that's a target group. Above, I mean, why do you want to bake a cake? For example, because you want to be appreciated by your family. I mean, cooking for your family and getting that appreciation is a huge motivator for why people go out of their way to create something for their loved ones. So the baking of the cake itself, and you could do this by just buying a cake as well. I mean, some families, they might do it that way, but it's expressing kind of, hey, I love you, basically, with a certain kind of food or something that I produced for you, is very, very strong. And that's a second job that plays just as much a role as the one of just to bake a cake, which is rather a functional thing.
Brilliant.
So,
yeah, that's very nice.
Does that help?
Very nice. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I'll give my opinion last, but I think
so you completely disagree, I believe.
No.
Okay.
I think actually it's totally in line with what I would have said. I'll maybe just say add a little element to it, but I totally agree. Scott, so what would your opinion be?
I think that makes, I 100% agree. Starting with the fact that, we begin with this idea, we say a customer hires a product to accomplish a job, makes it seem like it's a one-to-one relationship. That's really it's a metaphor. It's an oversimplification that we used when we're explaining jobs to be done. But when we're having the conversations we're having, we have to embrace a deeper complexity that's there. And one product can solve a lot of jobs, which is why this chicken wing riddle is so compelling, because you begin with the assumption it's about consuming chicken, and really it's about all of these other things. It's baking a cake, the time invested, showing that you love your family and feeling that too. And I can't help but wonder, especially since this is a food example, if there are jobs that, so we have to feed ourselves to live. And there's certainly something in our DNA that makes us want to take care of our families and to feed our children and to keep our children safe and fed. And I wonder if we want to keep ourselves fed too, but there's some satisfaction in taking care of others, especially in your family. When you have kids, you feel this like intensely, that you're accomplishing this by doing things for them, taking care of them. And I wonder, if just some of this, it's hard to, it's like, the jobs are there, but it's hard to put in words because it's so in our DNA. It's so, we're trying to get outside of ourselves and observe ourselves. But it's very difficult to do that, because it's just, why do I have this intense, pain when my kids are in pain? Or why do I feel great when I'm doing something that's helping them? Like if I just a simple thing, just like to go buy life insurance. Okay, that doesn't help me at all. That does nothing for me. Now I got to pay money every month, but I'm taking care of people I'm responsible for. I get great satisfaction in doing that. So I think, and with this food, we started talking about consuming, and then we also started about preparing meals for those we care about, and that's a pretty good job statement right there. But I'm beginning to wonder if one of the reasons it's so difficult is it's just so much a part of, it's just hardwired in us for people that are trying to survive. And an evolutionary point of view would say that those who feel that more strongly will be more successful at providing for their children, right? If you could just imagine, there's one group of people, they don't feel that at all. The next group feels it very strongly. Once they feel it strongly, they're going to do that job better, and ultimately their DNA are going to push out the ones that don't care about it. So
totally.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually very much, hopefully we're already quite a bit on, so I hope we'll have time to get to that. But I personally think this is very linked to the taste also, when we talk about taste. So all these evolutionary aspects. So brilliant. I'll just add the following, that I think it's basically, I'm just reformulating what Jan said. I think often we talk about a hierarchy of jobs. I think everyone nowadays acknowledges that we don't do things only to achieve one job, but often there's a hierarchy in abstraction of the jobs. And I think part of the context, it's important to often set a context in the job. And I think this is an important context to add, is the why you're doing this job, but why are you doing this? What's the higher level reason? Yeah. And I'm sure many people do take this into account, but I'm not sure it's that widespread. So for instance, as we said, so you could be, maybe your main job is to bake a cake. Okay, that's your focus job, but it's not at all the same thing. And your desired outcomes for this job will totally change if you are baking a cake in order to, I don't know, get enough energy for the after. I don't know what a good plain job would be. Get enough energy for the afternoon or whatever, or relax, or whatever the higher level job would be. Or if you're doing it to show love to your family, and I think the high level job does inform also the lower level jobs. So I totally agree on. And actually, maybe this is a good time now to move over to these emotional jobs, which we often also associate with higher level jobs, although I'm not sure that's necessarily always the case. Anyway, what are these emotional jobs? So, Jan, I know that, emotional jobs typically are split into social and personal emotional jobs. And Jan, I know that at Venbridge, at the consulting firm you work at, you're not big fans of emotional jobs. So could you maybe just tell us what an emotional job is in Jobs to be Done, and why you have such negative emotions towards them?
Okay, we're going to take a break in the action right there. We will continue next time to hear Jan's take on emotional jobs, and we will finally get to the bottom of this riddle. Does Jobs to be Done break on the question, why are chicken wings preferred over chicken tenders? We'll answer it next time on the Product Quest podcast. In the meantime, send any comments or questions to productquestpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time.